He made me quit my job because we couldn't have kids, then abandoned his son from an affair on my doorstep. Now he wants him back after 3 years. I, a 29-year-old woman, need to vent about the absolute nightmare that's been unfolding in my life over the past few years, and especially the last few weeks. 3 years ago, in the middle of the pandemic, my then-husband, James, a 33-year-old man, abandoned his 3-year-old son, Ethan, on my doorstep with nothing but a note. Yesterday, he showed up demanding him back, and I don't know how to process the audacity. For context, James and I were high school acquaintances. I was a sophomore when he was a senior. We weren't close, but everyone in our small-town high school knew I had a massive crush on him. It was embarrassing how obvious I was about it. My friends teased me relentlessly, and I'm pretty sure even he knew, though he was always kind enough not to mention it. He was always the responsible, mature type back then, or so I thought. After graduation, he went off to a prestigious engineering college on the other side of the country, and I eventually forgot about my silly crush. Life went on. Fast forward to my freshman year of college, I was at a club with my best friend, Sarah, when she noticed a guy staring at me from across the room. She was immediately protective and threatened to confront him. I told her to calm down and decided to handle it myself. I walked over, ready to tell off this creep, when I realized it was James. We reconnected that night, and he asked for my number. I played it cool, but inside, teenage me was freaking out. He had graduated by then and had a solid job at a tech company. After that night, he started pursuing me pretty intensely. At first, I enjoyed making him work for it. It felt validating after years of my unrequited crush, but eventually, we developed a genuine connection. He became someone I could rely on emotionally, and 6 months after running into each other, we started dating officially. I thought we were meant to be. 2 years later, we got married. I was 21, he was 25. Looking back, I was way too young. But I was head over heels and thought I'd found my forever person. The first year of marriage was good. I finished college, got a decent job, and we enjoyed our combined income lifestyle. We had the normal ups and downs, but I tried really hard to be a good wife. After my graduation, James started talking about having kids. He had this intense desire for a large family, at least 3 or 4 children. I would have preferred to wait a few years to enjoy our marriage and establish my career, but he was persistent. He kept saying I wasn't getting any younger, which is ridiculous considering I was only 22. So we started trying. After a few months with no success, I started getting anxious. By month 6, I wanted to see a doctor, but James kept saying we just needed to be patient. I had a bad feeling, but I didn't push the issue because I didn't want to upset him. 9 months into trying, the tension between us was unbearable. I was frustrated that James refused to consider medical help, and he started blaming my stress levels for our fertility problems. He convinced me that my job was causing too much stress and that I needed to quit to focus on family. Like an idiot, I agreed, hoping it would solve our problems. A few more months passed with no success, and I finally convinced James to see a doctor. After numerous tests, we received devastating news. I was fertile, and so was he, but we had a rare genetic incompatibility that made it nearly impossible for us to conceive together naturally. IVF might have been an option, but it was prohibitively expensive. James took the news horribly. Instead of accepting that it was a mutual issue, he somehow twisted it to blame me. He became distant and cold, and we went months barely speaking to each other. I moved into the guest room, feeling like a ghost in my own house. My mental health tanked, but James had work to distract him. I was stuck at home with nothing but my thoughts, isolated and blaming myself, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. Despite recognizing the red flags, his constant blame, emotional withdrawal, and refusal to discuss alternatives, I still wanted to fix our marriage. So I initiated reconciliation. We started couples therapy, which helped us navigate the intense feelings we both had. Our therapist was amazing at facilitating difficult conversations. And over several months, things gradually improved. I found a new job with lower pay, but it gave me purpose, and we avoided the topic of children, as our therapist suggested. During this time, I started researching adoption. I realized there were other ways to build our family, and I genuinely believed adoption could be our solution. I didn't mention it to James right away, unsure of how he'd react. We settled into a new normal for a while. Things were okay. Then the pandemic hit, and like many couples, we found ourselves working from home, facing uncertainty and fear together. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Wednesday afternoon in April 2020. James said he was going out to grab some groceries. We needed milk, bread, and toilet paper, which was still hard to find back then. I told him to lock the door on his way out and continued working. About an hour later, the doorbell rang. I was annoyed at being interrupted during a work call, but I wrapped it up and went to answer the door. When I opened it, I found a small boy, maybe 3 years old, standing there with a backpack and a letter. The child looked up at me and said his daddy and mommy told him to give me the letter. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from James. He confessed that he'd been having an affair since we started trying to conceive. He claimed our emotional disconnect had driven him to it, but the affair had become serious. When we learned about our fertility issues, his affair partner had gotten pregnant, which James saw as some kind of sign from the universe. The most shocking part, he was leaving me to be with her, but he was leaving their son, Ethan, with me? I thought it was some sick joke. Then, my phone buzzed with a text from James saying the same things from the letter. I tried calling him repeatedly, but he never answered, just texted that he wouldn't be coming back. I rushed to check our closet and found his favorite clothes and sentimental items gone. I collapsed on the floor in shock, only to look up and see little Ethan standing there, clutching his water bottle, looking confused and scared. Despite my shock and anger at James, the first couldn't feel anything but compassion for this innocent child who had just been abandoned by both his parents. I asked his name, and he told me he was Ethan, and he was 3. I realized I needed to do something for him immediately. I thought about calling child services, but was wary of putting him in the system when he'd already been through so much trauma. I decided I would try to find his family members while caring for him temporarily. The next few days were a blur, as Ethan and I both adjusted to the new situation. He was surprisingly easygoing and adaptable for a child who'd just been abandoned. In fact, his resilience made me even more suspicious of James and his affair partner. What kind of parents would give away such a sweet child? 2 weeks later, I received divorce papers signed by James. I contacted my lawyer immediately and pushed for the fastest possible divorce. I also asked my lawyer to help me search for Ethan's relatives, but we hit dead ends at every turn. I tried contacting James through every means possible, but he had completely ghosted us. I even asked around at his former workplace, but no one had any information about his whereabouts or his affair partner. As the months passed, I grew more attached to Ethan. He became the light in my life during an incredibly dark time. I found genuine happiness in caring for him, reading him bedtime stories, making pancake breakfasts on weekends, and playing endless games of hide and seek. He started calling me Mama, and I didn't correct him. After 6 months of searching with no success in finding his relatives, I made the decision to adopt Ethan legally. My lawyer assured me the process would be straightforward given the circumstances of abandonment. I had James's text messages and letter as evidence. The adoption process went through surprisingly smoothly. My parents were somewhat judgmental about the whole situation, making passive-aggressive comments about me raising another woman's child, but I ignored them. In my heart, I became Ethan's mother the moment I saw him standing at my door. Fast forward to yesterday. Ethan is now 6, in 1st grade, making friends and thriving. I'm doing well at work, and our life together is stable and happy. Then I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find James standing there. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked haggard and much older than his 33 years. I was too shocked to slam the door in his face, which I immediately regretted. James pushed his way into my house, saying he wanted to see his son and take him back. I threatened to call the police, but he insisted he was just visiting. I told him firmly that he had no son here, and that he had relinquished his parental rights when he abandoned Ethan. I let him believe I had given Ethan up for adoption, not wanting him to know that Ethan was still with me. I repeated my threat to press charges for trespassing if he didn't leave immediately. He finally left, but I was terrified he would try to follow me to Ethan's school. I immediately called my lawyer, who confirmed that James had no legal standing, but I was still shaken. I'm writing this now because I need advice. Has anyone dealt with an ex suddenly reappearing and trying to claim a child they abandoned? What should I do to protect Ethan? I'm terrified James will try to take him by force. Update 1. First, I want to thank everyone for the overwhelming support and advice on my original post. It really helped me stay focused and take the necessary steps to protect Ethan. I was right to be worried after James's visit. After he left my house that day, my instincts told me he might try to follow me to Ethan's school. I called my coworker Emily, whose daughter is in Ethan's class, and asked her to pick him up for me. She agreed without hesitation, saying she'd take him to her house until I could come get him. I promised to explain everything later. I watched through the window, and sure enough, about 20 minutes after he left, I spotted James's car parked down the street. He was clearly waiting to follow me. I stayed inside, and eventually he drove away. I waited another hour before driving to Emily's house through a longer route, constantly checking my rearview mirror to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I got to Emily's, I had to explain the situation. She was horrified but incredibly supportive. Her husband, Tom, who works in security, gave me some excellent advice about home safety and suggested I install cameras. They offered to help with school pickups until things settled down. I spent the next few days in a constant state of anxiety, jumping at every sound and checking the windows frequently. I explained to Ethan in simple terms that there was a not nice man who might try to talk to him, and that he should never go with anyone from school except me, Emily, or the short list of trusted adults we agreed on. A week passed with no sign of James, and I started to relax slightly. Then, last Sunday morning, while Ethan was watching cartoons, there was another knock at the door. I checked through the peephole and saw James again. I told Ethan to go to his room immediately and stay there until I called for him. He looked scared but did as I asked. I opened the door with the chain still on and told James to leave before I called the police. This time, James looked desperate. He begged me to just listen to him for 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I agreed to speak to him on the porch, not inside my home. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and folded my arms, telling him he had exactly 5 minutes. What he told me was absolutely infuriating. He explained that after leaving me, he moved across the country with his affair partner, Claire, and they had gotten married shortly after. She was pregnant with their second child when he left me. Their son was born a few months later, and they seemed to have the perfect family James had always wanted. But last year, James was driving drunk with their son in the car when they got into an accident. Their son was severely injured and had to spend months in the hospital. James was also injured and is now infertile due to complications from his injuries. Claire was furious and left him, taking full custody of their son, with no visitation rights for James due to his negligence. James claimed that losing his family and the possibility of having more children made him realize he had made a terrible mistake abandoning Ethan. His dream of having a large family was shattered, and he saw Ethan as his only chance at being a father now. I was livid. I told him he was delusional if he thought he could abandon his child for 3 years and then just waltz back in because his other family didn't work out. I informed him that Ethan was legally adopted, happy, and thriving, and that James had absolutely no rights to him anymore. James broke down crying, saying he would do anything to prove he had changed and deserved another chance. I told him the only thing he could do for Ethan was to stay away permanently. He became agitated, insisting that Ethan was his blood and that he had a right to know his son. That's when I told him I was recording our conversation. I wasn't. But he didn't know that, and that if he didn't leave immediately, I would call the police and file for a restraining order. He finally left, but the look in his eyes scared me. It was a mixture of desperation and determination that made me fear he wouldn't give up easily. I went inside and immediately called my lawyer. She advised me to file for a restraining order right away and provided a list of what I would need to document. I also called Emily and asked if Ethan and I could stay with them for a few days while I sorted things out, which they graciously agreed to. I spent the next day gathering evidence, the original letter from James, screenshots of text messages, my adoption paperwork, and a detailed account of both his visits. I filed for the restraining order the following day, and due to the circumstances involving a child, it was processed quickly. The court granted a temporary restraining order prohibiting James from coming within 500 feet of me, Ethan, our home, or his school. James was served with the order at the hotel where he was staying. According to the server, he seemed resigned when he received it, which gave me a small measure of relief. I've taken several additional precautions since then. I installed security cameras around the house, changed all the locks, and created a safety plan with Ethan's school. I provided them with a copy of the restraining order and a list of people authorized to pick him up. They've been incredibly understanding and have implemented extra security measures during drop-off and pickup times. I've also been having age-appropriate conversations with Ethan about safety without scaring him too much. We've established a password that any adult picking him up must know, and he understands that he should never go with anyone who doesn't know it, even if they claim I sent them. While all these practical measures have helped me feel safer, the emotional toll has been enormous. I've been struggling with anxiety, constantly looking over my shoulder and checking the security camera feeds. I was just starting to feel like Ethan and I had a stable, happy life, and now this threat has disrupted everything. Ethan has noticed my stress despite my attempts to hide it. He's been more clingy than usual and has had trouble sleeping. I'm trying my best to maintain normalcy for him, but it's challenging when I'm constantly on high alert. I'm worried about what James might do next, even with the restraining order. I don't trust him to stay away. His desperation is concerning, and I'm afraid he might try something drastic to get to Ethan. Has anyone dealt with something like this before? Any advice on how to maintain my sanity while keeping Ethan safe? How do I help him feel secure when I'm constantly worried? Update 2. It's been a month since my last update, and a lot has happened. For those wondering why I took so long to update, I needed time to process everything and make sure we were safe before sharing more details. First, the good news: the temporary restraining order against James was made permanent. The judge was extremely sympathetic to our situation and granted a 3-year restraining order that can be renewed if necessary. James attended the hearing but didn't contest it, which surprised me. Now for the complicated part. A week after the hearing, I received an email from James. He apologized for his behavior and said he respected the restraining order, but asked if he could send Ethan a letter explaining who he was. He claimed he just wanted Ethan to know he existed, and that his abandonment wasn't Ethan's fault. I was torn. On one hand, I wanted to delete the email and continue with our lives as if James didn't exist. On the other hand, I know from childhood development books that children often blame themselves when a parent abandons them. I worried that someday Ethan would find out about James and wonder why I never told him. After a lot of thought and a consultation with a child psychologist, I decided to tell Ethan a simplified version of the truth. I explained that James is his biological father who wasn't ready to be a parent when Ethan was little. I said James had made some bad choices and couldn't be in our lives now, but that it was never because of anything Ethan did. Ethan asked a few questions, mainly about whether James was a bad guy and if he had to see him. I reassured him that he wouldn't have to see James and that he was safe with me. He seemed satisfied with that explanation for now, though I'm prepared for more questions as he gets older. I responded to James's email, telling him I had spoken to Ethan in an age-appropriate way about who he was. I made it clear that I would not be facilitating any communication between them at this time, and that Ethan's well-being was my only priority. I also warned him that any violation of the restraining order would result in immediate legal action. He responded with another apology and said he understood. He included his phone number and email address in case Ethan ever wants to reach out when he's older. I saved the information, but have no plans to use it. Things seemed to calm down after that. The security measures I put in place made me feel safer, and Ethan and I started to return to our normal routine. He was doing well in school, and I was managing to focus on work again. Then, last week, something unexpected happened. I received a large envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a packet of legal documents and a handwritten note from Claire, James's ex-wife. In the note, Claire explained that she had found out about Ethan's existence only recently. She had discovered my contact information in James's phone when she was collecting evidence for their custody case. She apologized for James's actions and for any pain she might have caused by being involved with him while he was married to me. The legal documents were copies of her custody case against James. She included court records showing that James had been charged with DUI and child endangerment, resulting in the loss of his parental rights to their son. She wrote that she thought I should have this information in case James tried to challenge the restraining order or my adoption of Ethan. The most shocking part of her note was her revelation that James had a history of abandoning children. She had discovered that before me, he had been in a relationship with another woman who had a child. He had played father to that child for years, then suddenly left when the relationship ended, never contacting the child again despite promises to stay involved. She included contact information for this woman, suggesting I might want to speak with her about James's pattern of behavior. She ended the note by saying she was moving across the country with her son and had no intention of ever contacting me again, but she felt I deserved to know the full truth. I was stunned. I knew James was selfish and irresponsible, but I had no idea he had a pattern of forming and then abandoning relationships with children. It made me even more grateful that I had been able to legally adopt Ethan and that we had a restraining order in place. Out of curiosity, I called the woman Claire had mentioned. Her name was Lisa, and she confirmed everything Claire had said. James had been in her life for 4 years, acting as a father to her son from a previous relationship. When they broke up, he promised to stay involved, but immediately cut all contact. Her son, now a teenager, had struggled with abandonment issues for years. Lisa asked if I had any recent contact information for James, as he owed years of child support. I explained our situation and that I had a restraining order against him. She wasn't surprised and offered to testify about his pattern of behavior if I ever needed additional evidence to protect Ethan. After speaking with her, I called my lawyer again to update her on this new information. She advised me to keep all the documents and correspondence in case we needed them in the future, but she reassured me that our legal position remains strong. The adoption was final, and the restraining order was in place. I'm sharing all this because it's important for anyone in a similar situation to know that sometimes the truth is worse than you imagine. I thought James was just a selfish man who made a terrible decision, but now I know he has a pattern of using and discarding children when they no longer serve his purposes. I'm more convinced than ever that keeping him away from Ethan is the right decision. Ethan deserves stability and love, not a father who sees him as replaceable or only wants him when his other options have disappeared. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I'm happy to report that things have finally settled down. The restraining order against James is still in effect, and we haven't heard from him in months. My lawyer believes he's given up and moved on, but we're staying vigilant just in case. The security measures I put in place have become our new normal. Ethan knows the safety rules, and we've practiced what to do in various situations. The school has been amazing, maintaining extra vigilance during drop-off and pickup times, even though the immediate threat seems to have passed. About 3 months ago, I received a letter from James's parents. They explained that they had only recently learned about Ethan's existence and our situation. Apparently, James had kept Ethan a secret from them, just as he had kept his affair a secret from me. They were devastated to learn what their son had done and wanted to know if there was any possibility of them meeting their grandson. This put me in a difficult position. On one hand, these people had done nothing wrong and were Ethan's biological grandparents. On the other hand, I was wary of letting anyone connected to James into our lives. After careful consideration and consultation with my lawyer, I agreed to meet them at a neutral location without Ethan present. The meeting was emotional but productive. They seemed like genuinely good people who were horrified by their son's actions. They shared that James had always been troubled and selfish, even as a child, but they never imagined he would abandon his own son. They had distanced themselves from James after learning the full story and hadn't spoken to him in months. They showed me photos of themselves with Claire's son, their other grandson, from before the accident and custody battle. They explained that Claire still allowed them limited contact with him despite their son's actions, which I thought spoke well of her character and their relationship. After meeting them a few more times, I felt comfortable enough to introduce them to Ethan. I explained to him that they were his biological father's parents, but emphasized that they were not responsible for James's choices. Our first meeting was at a park, where Ethan could play and interact with them naturally without pressure. To my relief, they were wonderful, with him not overbearing or making big declarations about being his grandparents, just friendly adults who wanted to get to know him. Over the past few months, they've become part of our lives in a limited but positive way. They respect my boundaries and understand that I am Ethan's mother in every way that matters. They've also provided additional insight into James's background that has helped me understand the situation better. Apparently, James had always been obsessed with having the perfect family to the point of delusion. When reality didn't match his expectations, he would simply abandon the situation and start over rather than work through problems. His parents had tried to get him into therapy multiple times throughout his life, but he always refused. On a personal note, I finally started dating again. I met someone through a work conference who knows our whole story and has been incredibly understanding and patient. He's good with Ethan and respects that we're a package deal. It's early days, but it feels healthy and normal in a way my relationship with James never did. Ethan continues to thrive. He's doing well in school, has plenty of friends, and seems to have processed the limited information about James in a healthy way. He occasionally asks questions about his biological parents, which I answer truthfully but age appropriately. I've promised him that as he gets older, I'll share more details when he's ready. The most significant change has been in my own perspective. For a long time after James abandoned us, and especially after he reappeared, I lived in fear. I was constantly waiting for the next crisis, the next threat to our stability. I've realized that while staying vigilant is important, I can't let that fear control our lives. We found a new normal one that includes certain precautions but isn't dominated by them. I've learned that family isn't about biology or perfect circumstances. It's about showing up for each other every day, through good times and bad. To everyone who offered support and advice throughout this journey, thank you. Knowing I wasn't alone in this situation made all the difference. And to anyone going through something similar, know that it does get better. Protect yourself and your children legally. Build a support network, and don't be afraid to set firm boundaries. Ethan and I are looking forward to our future together. Whatever challenges come our way, we'll face them as we've faced everything else together.